Thank you very much. Let's bring in Kentucky Congressman Andy Barr for more on all this. Congressman, the president trying to put a little lipstick on this pig of a report. Did it work?
No, it didn't. Today's disappointing jobs report is not only evidence that the economy is slowing, David, it is further proof that this administration's tax, borrow, and spend economic policy is as disastrous as its Afghanistan policy. It's a total failure. Look, I mean, even though we have come out of the worst part of the pandemic from last year, from 2020, there's still 5 million fewer jobs today than there was before the pandemic. And there are 10.5 million job openings in America and 8.4 million unemployed Americans. And employers cannot find workers because this administration continues to pay people to not work.
And those unfilled jobs, that number keeps growing. Just a month or so ago, it was about 9.5 million unfilled jobs, then 10.1, now, as you say, 2.5. I mean, it just keeps growing. And wage growth is not keeping up with inflation. I mean, it was 0.6% month over month, but for the year, 4.3% wage growth. Inflation was 5.4%. That means working Americans are losing over a percentage point in earnings.
Yeah, David, let me tell you what's going on out in the real world. The last 2 days, I've been spending some time with employers in central Kentucky in my district. I met with the owner of an asphalt plant. I met with a supervisor in an auto parts manufacturing company. I met with a restaurant owner, a bunch of home builders, and I met with an auto dealer, a prominent auto dealer in central Kentucky, and they all have the same concern and the same complaint, and that's that they can't compete with the government for workers. They can't find workers. The government is discouraging workers, and it's compromising their ability to serve their customers. The auto dealer told me just this afternoon that this is the worst he's seen it in 40 years in the car business. And that's why we have to do everything we can to defeat this $3.5 trillion tax increase and more growth in the entitlement state, which would further put pressure on the labor shortage problem in this country.
And, you know, it's the small businesses. You mentioned the car dealership. It's the small restaurants. Contractors are having a terrible time finding workers. The big companies, the Amazons, the big multinationals that the president rails against as the problem. In fact, they're very happy with what he's doing, but it's the small people that are really being killed by this. The president, by the way, was speaking about these bad numbers, although he didn't refer to them as bad numbers, but he was talking about how much he cared about the middle class and how much he was going to go after the big corporation. Let me play a little soundbite of that and then get your reaction. Roll tape.
When corporations and the wealthy start to pay their fair share, it's going to put millions of people, according to all the estimates, millions of people to work in jobs that are going to help them punch their ticket to the middle class and stay in the middle class.
So this was a lead-in to talk about raising taxes, which he's going to do. Now, the Trump tax cuts that came in 2017, after the Trump tax cuts, we saw exactly what the president says we didn't see, which is that middle class did quite well. We had blue-collar wages growing faster than white-collar wages. We saw poverty rates hitting a record low in 2019. And this is the killer. Real household income increased by $4,379. That's 13 times the average annual post-war gain. So it was the blue collar, the working Americans, the middle class that benefited most from those tax cuts.
Absolutely true. And the numbers bear that out. And not only was it that we saw lower income Americans see the fastest wage growth in several decades, but also remember, we didn't have inflation. And because of this overspending, we're artificially increasing the cost of living. And so middle class Americans are getting a double whammy here. Not only are they facing higher taxes from the Biden proposals, they're facing a higher cost of living, which is an inflation tax. So this is a disastrous economic policy. We have to defeat more of this borrow, tax, and spend strategy that is making life more difficult for working Americans. And look, I've been talking to these people the last several days in my district, and they're telling me we've got to stop paying people to not work.
Well, the inflation comes from two policies, and both of them are directly the person responsible for them is President Biden. One is the extension of these unemployment benefits, incentivizing people to stay home rather than going to work. As you say, these businesses are competing with the government. If you have 10.5 million unfilled jobs, that means that you have far fewer things being made and services being provided, and that means the cost of each individual item goes up. And then, of course, as you say, when you're spending money you don't have, the printing presses start rolling out, and that also causes inflation. Now, Joe Manchin, the Democrat whose vote the president desperately needs in order to break that 50-50 tie, in order to pass his $3.5 trillion new plan. He says he's not going to do it. It's too much money. He believes that it is causing inflation. What's causing Joe Manchin to announce so publicly that he's going to bow out of the president's next spending plan?
Well, good for Senator Manchin. At least there's a kernel of common sense left in the Democrat Party. I think Senator Manchin is actually listening to the American people. He's listening to his constituents, those hardworking West Virginia miners and farmers and shopkeepers.
Who voted, by the way, forgive me, Congressman, but who voted overwhelmingly for President Trump in 2020. 68% of West Virginians voted for President Trump as opposed to 29% for Biden. And if you add in what's happened since then, the debacle in Afghanistan, inflation, the chaos at the border, I bet Trump could probably get 75% right now.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's true. But the bottom line is we just need economic policies that make sense, that do not produce inflation, that keep the cost of living low, but also lift wages the natural way through job creation and encouraging work. You know, I think that's what most hardworking Americans are so upset about. They think it's a kick in the teeth that they are working hard overtime in many cases, and the government is paying other people more to not work. It's just not right. It's not fair. And it's not fair to the people who are sidelined and out of the workforce. It deprives them of the dignity of work. Work is not a punishment. Work is a blessing. And it's time for our leadership in Washington to stop discouraging work. Work is the American way. Work is what makes us compete globally. And it's what's going to give Americans the prosperity they deserve.
By the way, Manchin has taken a lot of heat from the squad, as you might imagine. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, tweeted out about Manchin. Manchin has weekly huddles with Exxon as one of the many senators who gives lobbyists their pen to write so-called bipartisan fossil fuel bills. It's killing people. She's essentially accusing Joe Manchin of killing people. I just wonder how much longer the Democrats can go with this split. Let me quickly switch to Afghanistan specifically, because you've got a bill that calls for a full accounting of exactly what Joe Biden's hasty withdrawal did in terms of giving the Taliban, the terrorist organization, one of the biggest armies in the world, of our materials. Any luck in moving that bill forward?
Well, we shouldn't have any problem moving that forward because, David, as you know, your family is connected to the Marine Corps, and the Marines have a slogan: "Leave no one behind." Yeah. This administration has admitted that they left over 200 Americans who wanted to get out of Afghanistan behind, and we think that number could be in the thousands. On August 15th, when the Taliban took over Kabul, the estimates were 10,000 to 15,000 Americans stuck behind enemy lines in Afghanistan. On August 31st, Secretary Blinken briefed the Congress and said that they had extracted successfully about only 5,500 Americans. And their excuse is that, oh, well, these Americans don't want to leave Afghanistan. Now, think about that. How many Americans do you really believe want to stay in a failed, collapsed state that's run by terrorists that hate Americans? That makes no sense whatsoever. This president needs to do everything in his power to evacuate all Americans, leave no one behind. That's why this legislation would require an accounting of both the weapons that this administration left behind in enemy hands and also an accounting of the Americans who he abandoned in a war-torn country.
Excellent.
Every constituent I talk to, they are so mad about this, especially our veterans.
I think you can get Democrats voting for that as well. And by the way, Blinken was just on. He just had a press conference about an hour ago in which he kept talking about a small group of Americans, as if it's okay because it's just a small group. You know, frankly, I don't care if it's 10 or 1,000. We should not leave a single American behind. We shouldn't have. The president said he wasn't going to, and of course he did anyway. Congressman, we got to leave it at that. Great to have you here. Go ahead quickly.
This is a hostage crisis in the making, crisis in the making, and we cannot pay the Taliban any U.S. taxpayer funds, and the bill blocks that as well.
At the very least. All right, Congressman, thank you very much.